On my 24th birthday, Vittorio walked into the ballroom with his mistress on his arm. He raised his glass before the capos and smiled as if I were an old piece on his chessboard. Camille knows how to stand by my side without embarrassing me. 300 eyes waited for my collapse. I didn't give anyone that satisfaction. I slipped the 4-generation ring off my finger, placed it in her hand, and smiled. Then keep it all. The man, the name, the bed, and the shame. I walked out without looking back. On the front steps, Dante Valenti was waiting for me, leaning against his car. The rival Don, the enemy, and his smile made me understand that my humiliation hadn't ended my story. It had opened the door to revenge. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. My Birthday Surprise. I woke up before the alarm, as always happened on days when I knew something would cost me dearly. The bedroom at Villa Belandi smelled like the same cold perfume as always, white lilies that a maid replaced every 3 days, by my husband's express order. Vittorio liked flowers that didn't smell like a living woman. I had already learned to read in the smallest things the size of the men who chose for me, and for 4 years I had been reading. I stretched my hand across the icy sheet on the other side of the bed, empty, as on nearly every night. Vittorio slept upstairs, in the room he called his rest office, which had a double bed too large for a man who slept alone. I no longer asked. I had stopped asking in the 2nd year. I sat up slowly, 24 years old. I said the number in silence, like someone testing a word in a foreign language. It didn't sound like mine. At 20, I had walked into Villa Belandi with a suitcase and a degree in art history from the University of Florence. The suitcase had disappeared in the first week, replaced by clothes chosen by Vittorio's personal seamstress. The diploma had been hung in his office, in a black frame, as if it were a hunting trophy. I remembered standing for 2 minutes in front of that frame the day he hung it. Vittorio thought I was moved. I was understanding for the first time that he had framed the only thing I had brought of myself, and that there, behind that glass, was where I was also supposed to stay. I walked barefoot to the window. Milan was waking up gray, with that low October light that seemed to apologize for existing. From up here I could see the road that ran down to the city, and beyond it, in some invisible point to the south, Florence. The city where, before I turned 20, I would wake up with dried paint under my fingernails and the smell of lime on my hands. Scaffolding, fine brush, 15th century fresco asking for patience. I would ask for patience in return. The two of us managed it. Before 20, I had a teacher named Emma Colombo, who told me that the hand of a restorer is recognized by the way it touches a book before opening it. I still touched books that way. It was the only thing I had left. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and breathed. Today was my birthday. Vittorio had announced, 3 weeks before, that he would throw a party. I had thanked him. I had smiled prettily, the way he liked. I had chosen a black dress, long, closed up to the neck, because Vittorio thought a married woman shouldn't show her collarbone at a family party. I had agreed out loud, and in silence, noted in the corner of my memory that Capo Salviati was diabetic, and that Capo Lo Bianco owed an obscene amount to the loan shark at the port. Small things, decorative things. I had an entire mosaic of decorative things stored in my head, and none of the men in that house knew. I put on a cream silk robe and went downstairs. The breakfast room at Villa Belandi was a hall larger than it needed to be, with high ceilings, a crystal chandelier, and a table far too long for 2 people. Vittorio was already seated at the head, newspaper open, black coffee, charcoal gray suit. No tie yet. 38 years looked, on him, like 10 more. He had the kind of face that aged in layers, a layer of power, another of weariness, another of impatience. At 20, I had mistaken the first layer for personality. "Good morning," I said, pausing at the door. He didn't look up from the newspaper. "Good morning, Alessia." I sat at the other end. The maid, Lucia, appeared with the pot and poured my coffee without quite looking at me. Lucia had learned early not to look at me directly. That was how you survived in that house. "Happy birthday," Vittorio said, still without looking up. "The party will be at the villa in Como tonight. I've already sent for your dress." "What dress?" "The one I chose." I lifted the cup to my lips so I wouldn't answer right away. The coffee was too hot. I swallowed anyway. I had learned to swallow hot things. "In Como," I repeated calmly. "I thought it would be here in Milan." I changed my mind. He turned the page. "I have a surprise." That word, in his mouth, had never brought anything good. Surprise had been the name of the trip canceled on our first anniversary. It had been the name of the unannounced meeting that forced me to host 3 Sicilian capos for a whole week in our second year. It had been the name of his absence at my 22nd birthday party. I had turned 24 today, and the word still made me shiver in a way I couldn't hide. "What kind of surprise?" I asked without any tremor. Vittorio folded the newspaper slowly. He looked up for the first time. They were gray eyes, without depth. The eyes of a man who decided things in other rooms. "Alessia." The voice was patient, like someone speaking to a child. "You just need to smile prettily. The rest is up to me." I smiled prettily. It was the oldest reflex I had. "Of course." He returned to the newspaper. The conversation was over. I stayed 5 more minutes in front of the coffee so he wouldn't suspect any rush on my part, and when the clock chimed, I stood up without making any noise with the chair and crossed the hall. Before I reached the door, he spoke again, without looking up. "Oh, and put on the right ring. Not that silver one you've been wearing. The Belandi one." "I always wear the Belandi one, Vittorio, whenever I remember to look." I left the hall without answering. In the corridor, I closed my hand over the chest of the robe and took 3 deep breaths. It wasn't anger. It was something older, that ran deeper. It was the realization, repeated for the 1000th time, that the man with whom I had shared a house for 4 years didn't know the name of the silver ring I wore on my little finger. It was my mother's ring. It had been in that house the whole time. He had never seen it. I climbed the stairs and turned left toward the closet. The dress Vittorio had chosen was hanging on the central hanger. Black silk, fitted, modest neckline, 3/4 sleeves. The kind of dress that said I belonged to him, that I was an elegant backdrop for any scene he might want to paint that night. I put on the dress. I put on the jewelry he had ordered to be laid out. Pearl earrings, a white gold necklace, and the Belandi engagement ring. 4 generations of dark blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. The ring weighed more than it looked. It had always weighed. In the inner pocket, that Vittorio had sewn into all formal dresses without noticing, thinking it was a seamstress's detail, I tucked my father's pen. Black, fountain pen, with a worn gold band. The only thing I had asked to keep when he died. It was the only object in that house that was mine, and only mine. I combed my hair into a low bun. I put on dark lipstick. I gave the pretty smile in the mirror just to make sure it still worked. It worked. I went down the stairs slowly. Vittorio was already standing in the hall, with his back to me, party suit, talking on the phone. When he heard me, he turned and looked me up and down. His eyes paused 3 seconds on the necklace. Not on my face. Never on my face. "Let's go," he said, hanging up the phone. "We're almost late because of you." I didn't answer. I crossed the hall, crossed the wooden double doors that a goon opened without greeting me, and went down the 3 stone steps to the car. The driver waited for me with the back door open. I got in. Vittorio got in from the other side. The door closed with that armored sound I had learned to recognize in the first month of marriage, the sound of a vault closing. The car pulled out down the cypress-lined avenue, heading toward Como. I looked out the window and thought, with a calm that wasn't mine yet but was arriving, that tonight I would swallow one more humiliation, as I had swallowed the other 3. That was how you survived in that house. That was how you memorized one more password, one more route, one more name. That was how you made it to 25. I thought that. I was wrong. Chapter 2. Then keep it all. The villa in Como glowed on the other side of the gate as if the night had been commissioned by a set designer. I got out of the car with Vittorio's hand on my elbow. The exact pressure to look like chivalry to anyone watching. The exact force to remind me who was in charge. He had learned that touch in the first week of marriage. I had learned not to react to it in the second. Chandeliers lit behind every window. Expensive cars in the gravel parking lot. Capos in black jackets smoking near the entrance columns. In small groups of 3, as they did at every Corona Nera dinner. I saw Capo Salviati in the second group, near the fountain. Capo Lo Bianco in the third. Capo Trentino arriving behind me with a very tall blonde who wasn't his wife. I made a note. "Smile," Vittorio whispered as we climbed the stone steps. I smiled. The main hall was a long rectangular space with double-height ceilings, Venetian mirrors on the 2 side walls, and glass doors open to the terrace over the lake. Round tables dressed in dark damask. Low candles. String quartet music in the background. Something by Vivaldi played too slowly to be beautiful. Smell of flowers and expensive tobacco. I recognized at least 50 faces. I also recognized the 3 discreet security cameras in the corners of the ceiling, because Vittorio liked to film his own events so he could later review who had greeted whom. "They're all going to start arriving," he said, adjusting his cuff. "You stay close to me." "I always do." He looked at me for a second. He saw nothing because I had shown nothing. He turned his eyes back to the hall. "The surprise comes in half an hour." I started counting the time from that point on. I greeted people. I greeted Capo Salviati's wife, who smelled of gardenia and kissed me on both cheeks as always. I greeted 2 Sicilian cousins of Vittorio's whom I saw once a year. I greeted the Monsignor who blessed the family's business in exchange for donations to the parish. I greeted the family lawyer, Ferry, who had the kind of damp, lingering handshake that forced me to wash my hand afterward. I smiled prettily at each one. I drank exactly half a glass of champagne because that was what was expected of Signora Belandi at her own party. Drink little, eat less, thank profusely, remember everything. It was when I crossed the hall to greet Capolo Bianco's mother that I saw, on the other side, leaning against a column near the terrace door, a man I had not seen there before. Tall, dark hair, short, with white strands too early at the temples. Black suit cut with a precision that wasn't Italian. French, perhaps, or Old English. No tie. White shirt buttoned up to the neck, without a collar button. Right hand in his pocket, left hand holding a glass he hadn't drunk from. He was looking straight at me. He didn't look away when I caught his eye. I looked away. I kept walking. I greeted Signora Lo Bianco. I smiled. I said something about the October weather. I returned to Vittorio's side without running. On the way, I asked Ferry in a low voice, like someone commenting on a dress. The man near the terrace column. Tall, no tie. Who is he? Ferry glanced over, and then, too quickly, lowered his eyes. Dante Valenti, Signora. I didn't blink. Valenti came here today? Political invitation. Capo Salviati arranged it. A courtesy between families. To refuse would be, Ferry searched for the word, indelicate. Indelicate, I repeated. Don Vittorio accepted last week. I thanked Ferry. I returned to my husband's side. I felt, without needing to look, that on the other side of the hall, the man at the column was still watching. Not the way a capo looks at the wife of another capo. In a slower way. In a way that measured things. I had been looked at in many ways in 4 years of marriage, and that look was none of the ones I recognized. I made a note. 15 minutes later, the quartet stopped playing. Vittorio tapped twice on his glass with the small silver knife from the place setting. The capos turned. The wives turned. The heads hanging on conversations turned. I also turned, because that was what was expected. "Friends," said Vittorio, in that public voice he used when he wanted to be heard down to the last waiter. "Today my wife turns 24. Brief applause. I smiled prettily. But today is also a night of introductions. He held out his hand toward the side door of the hall. There is someone many of you know from business, and whom I want, tonight, to introduce in a different way. The door opened. Camille walked in. I had seen her twice before, always from a distance, always coming out of a restaurant where Vittorio wasn't supposed to be. French. Honey blonde hair pinned up in a high bun that left the nape of her neck on display. Blood-red dress, strapless, slid up to mid-thigh. Smile trained for cameras. Early 20s, maybe 23, maybe less. On her neck, the necklace. I recognized it before my brain processed what I was recognizing. It was the twin jewel to mine. The dark blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, identical to my ring, set on a short white gold chain. Vittorio had had it made. There was no other explanation. That design had been exclusive to the Belandi family for 4 generations, and the only person in the world authorized to commission a copy was the man now standing next to me. I didn't blink. Vittorio smiled. A smile I didn't recognize. The smile of a man who was actually enjoying himself for the first time in months. He held out his hand to Camille. She crossed the 3 meters between the door and him, with the calm of someone who had already rehearsed the walk in the mirror. When she reached him, he pulled her by the waist, turned to the entire hall, raised his glass, and said, loud, clear, slow, so that no one in the Corona Nera could pretend not to have heard, "This is Camille, the woman who knows how to stand by my side without embarrassing me." The hall went silent for half a second. Then, because they were capos, and capos knew what to do when a don raised a glass, everyone raised their glasses too. I raised mine too. I smiled prettily. Inside, I wasn't thinking about anything. It was the strangest thing. I had always imagined that at a moment like this I would think a lot, or cry, or feel the room spin. No, the room was still. The faces were still. Time had frozen in a clean, icy, soundless place, where I could only hear one thing, the slow, almost amused breathing of the man leaning against the terrace column, who from the other side of the hall was looking at me now, the way someone looks at a card being turned over on a gaming table. Vittorio kissed Camille on the cheek, not mine, hers, in front of everyone. The twin sapphire of mine glinted at the Frenchwoman's throat. I lowered the glass with the care of someone who doesn't drop anything. I pressed my hand against the inner pocket of the dress. I felt the shape of my father's pen against my thigh. I didn't take it out. I just touched it, like someone confirming a key is still in place. And then I started walking. I know, today, that at that exact instant many people in that hall thought I was heading for the door. I also thought for a fraction of a second of heading for the door. But the door solved nothing. The door left the ring on my finger. The door left the name Belandi on my back. The door left the twin sapphire on her neck as a prize that I hadn't handed over with my own hand. I didn't go to the door. I went to Camille. I crossed the hall under 300 eyes. It wasn't fast. It wasn't slow. It was the right pace, in low-heeled shoes that didn't trip on an old Persian rug. The quartet didn't start playing again. No waiter moved. Capo Salviati lowered his glass. Capo Lo Bianco lowered his glass. Ferry lowered his eyes. Vittorio saw me coming, and his first reaction was to smile, because he thought, I'm sure of it, I've known that face for 4 years, that I was coming to greet his mistress in public. He thought I was going to hug Camille. He thought it was going to be, from start to finish, the most perfect night of his life. I stopped a meter away from them. I looked at Camille. Her eyes were green. They looked younger up close. There was a slight tremor at the corner of her lip that she was trying to control with her smile, and that she couldn't hide from me, because I had 4 years of practice reading trembling lips in the mirror. Camille, I said, with a calm that wasn't mine but had arrived out of nowhere from the inner pocket of the dress. Welcome. She tilted her head, not knowing what to say. I raised my left hand. The 4-generation Belandi ring caught the chandelier light and sent back a dark blue glow throughout the hall. I slipped the ring off slowly. I didn't know, until that night, that the gesture of removing a ring from your finger could make a sound in a crowded hall. It did. It was the loudest sound in Belandi history. I extended my hand to Camille with the ring on my fingertips. She hesitated. She looked at Vittorio. Vittorio had frozen with his glass half tilted. His eyes were open the way I had never seen them. Open like a man who understands 1 second too late that he has lost control of his own hall. Hold out your hand, Camille, I said softly. Just for her. Don't be afraid. It won't weigh more than it's already weighing. She held it out. I placed the ring in her palm. I closed her fingers around it. I kept my hand over hers for 2 more seconds exactly, so that the picture would stay in the head of every capo present. And I said, in a clear, slow voice, at exactly the right speed, so the most distant waiter could hear, then keep it all. The man, the name, the shame, he's all yours. I let go of her hand. I turned, not to Vittorio, to the hall. Good evening, I said, to the entire hall. Thank you for the congratulations. And I walked toward the front door. I crossed the Persian rug back without tripping. Capo Salviati did not greet me. Capo Lo Bianco bowed his head. Capo Lo Bianco's mother touched her daughter-in-law's arm next to me, as if trying to prevent a reaction. The daughter-in-law didn't react. No one reacted. The hall had frozen and I was the only thing moving inside it. Behind me, I heard Vittorio's voice call my name once. Alessia, without force, like someone who still hadn't understood that it was too late to call. I didn't turn around. I pushed open the wooden double doors. The October air hit me in the face, cold and clean, with the smell of wet cypress and stone. The villa's outer staircase descended in 3 flights to the gravel of the parking lot. I went down the first flight slowly, without trembling. I went down the second. When I reached the third, that was when I felt my legs begin to understand what had just happened, and so I stopped halfway down the step, gripped the iron handrail, and took a deep breath, once, twice, 3 times, without crying, without losing my verticality, waiting for the rhythm of my chest to return to normal. When I lifted my head, he was at the bottom of the staircase, leaning against a black car, low, long, with no crest, the driver's window rolled up, hands in his coat pockets, the same white shirt buttoned up to the neck, hair slightly tousled by the wind off the lake, dark eyes, attentive, in no hurry at all. He had gone out through the side door, obviously. He had gotten there before me. He had waited. Dante Valenti, I thought. Dawn of the Valentis, standing on the staircase where the name Belandi had just turned to dust. Signora Belandi, he said. Moretti, I corrected, before thinking. I just returned the other name. He tilted his head half a centimeter. It wasn't a bow. It was curiosity. Signora Moretti, he corrected, with the final vowel slightly elongated, and his voice was lower than the light of the hall had suggested. Who is taking you back to Milan? I hadn't thought about that. I can offer you a ride. It wasn't a question. It was formal courtesy, spoken with the precision of someone who had calculated the sentence. I looked at him from the top of my step, and he looked at me from the top of his calm, and for 2 seconds I measured the distance between the staircase and the parking lot, between the parking lot and the gravel, between the gravel and any other car at that party that could take me out of there without me having to step into the car of the man who had waited, outside, exactly on that staircase, exactly on that night. There was no other car. There was no coincidence. I knew that already, but I also knew, and that was the newest part of me, the part that had been born 5 minutes earlier in the hall upstairs, that accepting a ride from a rival Dawn was not a greater mistake than standing on the staircase waiting for my husband to come fetch me with armed men. I went down the 3rd flight. I stopped a meter away from him, close enough to smell his coat. Good wool, a faint residue of some dry cologne that wasn't sweet. I looked into his eyes. They were eyes that measured. They weren't gray eyes like Vittorio's. They were almost black. Don Valenti, I said, with a voice firmer than I had expected. Why was the Don waiting for me down here? He didn't look away. Because I saw you cross the hall, he answered slowly. And I understood where you'd end up. Where? Here. And you decided to be here first. I decided. His honesty disarmed me for half a second, and the half second was enough for me to understand that he had calculated the honesty for exactly that purpose. Don Valenti, I said, and this time, I let out, for the first time that night, something that resembled my voice from before 20, the voice of the girl who touched books before opening them. If I'm going to be used again tonight, I'd rather know by whom. He held back his laugh. I saw it. It was quick. It was the kind of short laugh that men like him let out maybe 3 times a year, in private, and that he had almost let slip in front of me the first time we crossed a sentence. Signora Moretti, he said, and opened the back door of the car with his free hand. For tonight, what I can promise is that no one is going to use me to get to you. That doesn't answer my question. It doesn't. I looked inside the car. Dark leather. No driver behind the wheel yet. The key was in the ignition. The dashboard was off. It was the car of a man who drove his own car when he wanted to talk privately. Behind me, up there, the door of the villa opened. I heard Vittorio's voice from the 2nd flight of the staircase, now with force, now shouting my name again. Alessia. And this time it wasn't the man who still hadn't understood. It was the man who had understood too much, and too late. I got in the car. Dante closed the door with the care of someone closing a vault. He walked around. He sat at the wheel. He turned the key. The engine purred, low, and the car shifted into first, sliding slowly across the gravel. In the side mirror, I saw Vittorio reaching the bottom of the staircase. I saw his party suit rumpled at the chest. I saw his hand raised in the air like someone still calling. I saw the ring from my hand, which was now in Camille's hand, which was now not in the hall, because Camille had stayed up there, standing still. The car drove out through the gate. Dante didn't speak on the first curve, nor on the second. He accelerated on the side road that hugged the lake without hurry, with the confidence of someone who knew the curve without looking. I looked at him from the side, firm jaw, eyes on the road, a thin scar, almost invisible, that ran from the corner of his left temple to nearly his ear. I hadn't seen it in the hall. I saw it now, because I was meant to see it now. Don Valenti, I said softly. Dante. Don Valenti, I repeated, because I wasn't going to step into his first name on the same night I had stepped out of my husband's name. Where are we going? He didn't take his eyes off the road. To a place where no one will enter without your permission, until you decide your next step. And if I decide to go back to Milan, I'll take you. Tonight? Tonight. I looked ahead. The road climbed, curved, descended, and from the height to the right, the Lake of Como opened the night in a black bottomless mirror. I pressed my hand against the inner pocket of the dress. I felt my father's pen against my thigh. I thought of him for the first time in hours, and I thought of him in the wrong way. I wondered if he would have understood what I had just done, and I thought yes, and I thought he would have approved, and I also thought, and this gave me more cold than the wind from the badly closed car window, that maybe he would have understood better than I did the kind of man who was driving now beside me, in silence, calculating things I didn't yet know were being calculated. Dante shifted gears. The engine dropped in tone. "Signora Moretti," he said without looking at me, "tonight you ended something. I need you to know that I know that. And have you started something, Don Valenti?" The question came out before I could moderate it. He looked at me for half a second. He turned his eyes back to the road. "Perhaps," he answered. "Perhaps isn't an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." I didn't respond. I closed my eyes for an instant, rested my temple against the cold glass of the door, and let the lake pass outside in a bottomless mirror. Somewhere behind us, in a hall of the villa in Como, Camille must have still been there with her hand closed around my ring. Vittorio must have been shouting my name to empty gravel. The entire Corona Nera must already have been exchanging glances through the Venetian mirrors, calculating, in silence, which Don had just lost more, and in silence too, adjusting toward which side of the table they would look at the next meeting. The details still escaped me. The essential, no. I had gotten into that car without being pushed, and that was, for the first time in 4 years, different from anything else that had happened to me since I was 15. The car accelerated. The road curved, and far ahead, at some invisible point in front of us, in the bend where the lake turned south, an isolated light from some villa or other shone for a second and went out. I didn't know it was his villa. Not yet. Chapter 3. The Rival Don's House. The car glided down a narrow road that descended in curves toward Lake Como. I saw the black water reflecting the scattered lights of the villas. I felt the cold leather of the seat beneath my palms. Dante drove in silence, with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gear shift, and I watched the line of his jaw in the dashboard light, without him noticing. We had already passed through the sleeping town some 10 minutes earlier. The digital clock in the car read almost 1 in the morning. "Almost there," he said, without turning. "Almost where for what exactly? For you to decide whether you want to sleep, or whether you'd rather start with the bad part." I found it funny inside. On the outside, I kept my posture. "Start with the bad part. I'll sleep later." He turned his face for a second, just long enough for me to notice he smiled. Not with his mouth, only with the corner of his eye. He turned his attention back to the next curve. We passed through a tall iron gate that opened before the car reached it. A gravel path climbed between cypress trees up to a facade of pale stone, 3 stories, windows lit only on the ground floor. They seemed to have been waiting for hours, although no one could know he would return with a woman. "Villa Valenti," he said. "You will not be locked in. You will be protected. Make the distinction in your head before you get out." I already have. He parked in front of the main door. A tall, thin man, in a dark jacket, and a faint, ironic smile on his lips, opened the car door on my side before Dante had finished turning off the engine. "Tommaso," Dante said without turning. "Signora Moretti is going to stay." Tommaso extended his hand to help me out. The grip was firm and short. "Signora," he said, "the house is not used to a female voice. It will get used to it." I climbed the 3 stone steps next to Dante. The air inside the villa was dry, smelling of furniture wax and something of cold tobacco. A low chandelier lit the foyer. There was a marble staircase to the right, a long corridor to the left, and at the end, the half-open door of a room where yellow light escaped. I noticed everything in 3 seconds. My father's pen weighed in the pocket of the dress as if it were a stone. Dante led me first to the sitting room. He took off his jacket, hung it on the back of a chair. The white shirt had a smudge of cream from my blush on the shoulder. I hadn't even seen when I had touched him. I noticed without commenting. "Sit," he said. "I prefer to listen standing." He rested his hand on the arm of an armchair, chose not to insist. "The proposal is simple," he began, with the low voice he had already used in the car. "You stay here as long as necessary. In exchange, you testify against Vittorio in the circles that matter, not in court. At the dinners where Corona Nera decisions are made, you say what you saw, what you heard, what he said near you thinking you didn't understand. In exchange, I guarantee he will not come near the door of this villa. You're offering me protection in exchange for information. I am. And you think that puts me at a disadvantage. I don't think anything. I'm telling you what I have to offer." I looked at him for a long time. He held the look without blinking. I crossed my arms, felt the cold satin of the dress against my skin. "Then I also have conditions," I said. "A room with a key. I keep the key. No one comes in without knocking. No armed men inside this house while I'm here. If you want security, keep it from the gate outward. and access to the documents about Vittorio. All of them. The ones from 5 years ago, too. I want to read before opening my mouth at any dinner. He tilted his head. I saw his jaw lock and relax. Documents from 5 years ago don't leave my office. Then I'll read in your office. You're asking permission to sit in my chair. I'm asking permission not to be used blindly. If that's too much, I go back to the car. Tommaso takes me to Florence. I disappear on my own, and you deal with Vittorio without a witness. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Tommaso, standing at the door, was pretending to examine his watch. I accept, Dante said finally. Room with key. You read in my office. No weapons inside the house. Good, I answered, and felt, without meaning to, the tension leave my shoulders. He walked to the door, stopped at the threshold. Do you have any idea how much I hate negotiating with someone who knows exactly what they want? Yes, I answered. It's the only reason I accepted the ride. That night, he showed me the room on the 2nd floor. Window facing the lake, 4-poster bed, a heavy bronze key that he placed in my palm without letting his finger touch my skin. He locked the door from the outside on the inside, so that I would hear the click and know, without doubt, that the key worked only from my side. I stayed half an hour staring at the ceiling before I got up to take off the dress. My father's pen, I placed on the nightstand. I slept with the light from the lake coming through the cracks in the curtain. In 3 days, I mapped the entire house without asking anyone. Library on the ground floor, east wing. Dante's office on the ground floor, west wing. Stone kitchen behind the dining room. A small chapel in the garden, closed, with a warped door. On the 2nd day, Renzo Caputo, the consigliere, appeared at the door of my room, 6 feet of severity and silence, before saying only, Signora, I hope the Don knows what he is doing. So do I answered. On the 3rd day, looking for a bathroom at the end of the east corridor, I opened the wrong door and found the library, a high-ceilinged room, 3 windows facing the garden, dark oak shelves from floor to ceiling, books stacked on the floor in boxes, in disorder that hurt the eyes. No one had touched the place in years. Something in me, from the Florence of 20 years, recognized the place. I closed the door behind me and began organizing. It was on a Wednesday night that I found the book. I had already mentally catalogued a third of the library. I had reached the 3rd shelf of the west wall, behind a wooden ladder that no one should have moved in decades. Behind a thick volume of Dante, the coincidence drew a half-smile from me. There was a thin book, with a faded dark blue cover, with faded gold letters. A children's book, Il Piccolo Cavaliere. I opened it. On the flyleaf, in careful, rounded handwriting, someone had written, Per il mio Dante, perché impari a non aver paura del buio. La mamma, 1992. For my Dante, so he learns not to be afraid of the dark. Mama, 1992. I closed the book carefully. I felt something strange tighten between my ribs. Not pity, not tenderness, something more sober. His mother had died. I knew. I had heard at the Belandi dinners years ago, when Vittorio mentioned the Valentis with irony. I didn't know he kept her book there, lost among 1,000 others, like someone hiding from himself. I thought about returning it to the shelf and pretending I had never seen it. I thought about putting it on the library table, in a place of honor. I thought about taking it to my room. I ended up leaving it exactly where it was, behind the thick Dante. I sat on the ladder, with the blue book in my hands, and stayed reading the first page, while the light from the window faded. I didn't hear the door open. I heard the footsteps. I looked up. He was standing at the threshold with his shirt without jacket, without tie, with his collar open. He didn't say anything. He looked at the book in my hands for 1 long second, and then at my face, and then again at the book. I saw his jaw lock. I saw the control return. He didn't say a word. He took half a step inside, changed his mind, stayed at the threshold. Finally, he closed the door, from the outside, with a strange care, almost reverent, like someone closing the door of a child's bedroom. I remained seated on the ladder. I put the book back in the exact spot. But the note, I made mentally, his mother, dead, book kept, strange care when closing the door, vulnerability exposed for 2 seconds. It was strategic data. It was what he would give me to use against him on a bad night, if I were the kind of woman who did that. I didn't yet know what kind of woman I would be with him, but the note stayed. Tommaso told me standing next to the kitchen table, while I was cutting day-old bread for the soup I had decided to make because I was tired of the food of Dante's cook. He had heard from a Belandi waiter. Camille had appeared at Wednesday's dinner at Vittorio's villa, wearing the 4-generation ring on her little finger, too small for the size of her hand, but put on display. She had drunk too much. She had laughed loudly. She had said, in front of 3 capos and 2 wives, that the little Italian girl had handed over the name because she never knew how to use it. I didn't ask for the gossip, I said without looking up from the knife. You didn't ask, Tommaso answered. I brought it. Important difference. I kept cutting. I didn't say anything for a while. And Vittorio? I asked finally. He laughed along in the first hour. In the second hour, he told her to shut her mouth in front of Lo Bianco. In the third hour, he took her outside by the elbow. Tommaso paused. Lo Bianco saw it, signora. A Belandi capo seeing the Don treat his mistress like a servant in front of him. That's news. I put down the knife. I leaned my hips against the counter. Keep bringing the gossip, Tommaso. Please. I imagined, he said, and left. I stayed alone in the kitchen, with the smell of old bread, and thought. Camille with the small ring on her little finger. Vittorio discharging the size of his own humiliation onto the woman he had chosen to humiliate the first. Lo Bianco watching everything from afar, calculating how much the Belandis were still worth. I didn't pity Camille, not yet, but I saw with cold clarity that she was already a disposable tool of a man who discarded by habit, and that this, in some future meeting, at some future dinner, could be useful to me. I went back to cutting the bread. On Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I went back to the library at 3 a.m, with a coat over my nightgown, and spread on the central table 3 maps that I had found in the bottom drawer of the desk. Maps of ports in northern Italy, Genoa, Trieste, La Spezia. Pencil markings on routes I recognized, because I had heard Vittorio speak of them for 4 years, behind doors he thought were too thick. I was holding the pencil in my hand, making a cross at a point on the coast between Genoa and Savona, when I heard the door open. I looked up. Dante was standing there, white short-sleeved t-shirt, dark pajama pants, barefoot, his hair slightly tousled. In his right hand, a bottle of red wine without a label and a glass. A second glass he held by the stem along with the first. He didn't say a word for a second. I couldn't sleep, he said finally. I saw light under the door when I went down to the kitchen. I grabbed another glass on the way. I looked at the maps. I looked at him. I didn't close anything. I didn't hide anything. 3 a.m, signora, he said slowly. Insomnia or work? Both. He came in, closed the door behind him. He set the bottle and the glasses down on the free end of the table, away from the maps, careful not to drip on the papers. May I? I nodded, and felt, without meaning to, my heart beat 2 points higher than it should. Chapter 4. Maps at 3 a.m. He pulled out a high-back chair and sat down across from me, on the other side of the central table. He poured the wine into both glasses without asking if I wanted any. He pushed one in my direction across the dark wood varnish. You mark the ports like someone drawing, he observed. That's what I do. Restorer, he said more to himself. It was supposed to be. I picked up the glass. The wine was dark and dense, smelling of black cherry. Before 20. Before him. He neither confirmed nor denied the reading. I didn't answer in turn. I brought the wine to my lips. He waited for me to speak in my own time. Genoa, I said finally, pointing with the end of the pencil. The route Vittorio uses for the cargo he calls olive oil. It leaves from here, I marked the point, comes around, and unloads there, at a private wharf between Savona and Vado Ligure. Capo Trentino is the one who runs it. The documents go out in the name of a cooperative of producers that doesn't exist. Dante rested his elbows on the table. He didn't interrupt me. Trieste, I continued. Different. There it's Capo Ferri. But Ferri owes a debt to Salviati, and Salviati is the man who put your name on the guest list for the party. So, in practice, Ferri is half yours. He tilted his head slightly. How do you know that? Vittorio speaks loudly when he drinks, and I don't close the library door when he has guests. He never suspected? He called me decorative for 4 years. Decorative doesn't listen. I listened. The corner of his mouth moved. It didn't quite become a smile. Show me La Spezia. I turned the map across to him, but it was upside down from his angle. He stood up, came around the table, and stopped beside me, leaning over the paper. His arm touched mine, a small touch, of his white t-shirt against the sleeve of the robe. Neither of us moved. I felt the warmth coming through the fabric. Here, I said, after a second that was too long. My voice came out lower than it should have. It's a small anchorage. Vittorio uses it twice a month. Not for drugs. For money. Whose money? His. In suitcases. Leaving the country by sea to Tunisia. and coming back washed by 2 banks in Lugano. Bank passwords. I looked at him. He was leaning close enough for me to see up close the thin scar near his left temple, which I had never noticed so closely. Passwords I don't give for free, I said. I'm not asking for free. I'm not offering yet. He let out a short breath through his nose, like someone laughing on the inside. He went back to his side of the table, sat down again. He drank from the wine. I drew another cross at La Spezia, still feeling the exact spot of his arm on mine. We talked about routes until 4:30 in the morning. For the first time in 4 years, a man listened to me speak of merchandise trafficking as if I were the source and not the wife who had cracked open the right door at the right time. I interpreted that as strategy. He was using me because I was useful, and I was useful because I had decided to be. It was exactly what I had accepted in the car on the way to the villa. It was the agreement. I didn't notice at the time the small tremor in his hand when he refilled my glass and the wine spilled over the rim. On Friday it rained all day. Heavy rain, the kind of October rain in the north, that beat on the roof tiles with the sound of a small drum. I spent the afternoon in the library. At nightfall, I went down to the kitchen because I had smelled smoke through the corridor and grew suspicious. Dante was facing the stove, with a dishcloth hanging on his shoulder, stirring with a wooden spoon the contents of a frying pan that was spitting black smoke up to the ceiling. There were broken eggs on the counter, shells and all, an open bottle of wine, a half onion, a piece of butter melting on a saucer outside the refrigerator. He saw me arrive at the door and didn't turn. "Before you say anything," he said, without taking his eyes off the pan, "the cook's dinner is ready. This here is something else." "What is this here?" "It was supposed to be risotto." "It was." "Stop right there." I crossed my arms at the doorway. I looked at the smoke rise and form a gray layer beneath the light fixture. I looked at the melted butter running across the marble. I looked at the wooden spoon coming out of the pan with what seemed to be a black and hard mass, and I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. I started low, with my shoulders shaking, then loud, then uncontrolled, without dignity, with my hand on the doorframe so I wouldn't fall. It was a belly laugh that I didn't laugh. I calculated on the spot, with the cold part of my head that never slept, for maybe 6 years. He turned off the heat, set down the spoon, turned to me, slowly, with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You're laughing." "I am," I said, still out of breath. "I burned the risotto." "You burned," I agreed, "the pan." He looked at the pan. He looked at me. And then, and this I didn't expect, he smiled. A small smile, but a whole one, with no calculation, no mask. It was the first time in 3 weeks that I had seen him do that. I stopped laughing, suddenly, like someone caught at something. "I'll apologize for the mess," he said, "if you eat it anyway." "I'm not going to eat that." "Then you're going to eat bread and butter beside me." "Maybe." Tommaso appeared at the kitchen door. He looked at the smoke-filled ceiling, at the smile still on my lips, at Dante with the dishcloth on his shoulder, and said without changing his tone, "Signora, the Don has burned dinner again. I suggest pretending it's good. It wasn't for her." Dante answered without turning. "Worse then," Tommaso added, and walked out. It was at that moment that we heard the cars, 3 pairs of headlights climbing the gravel drive in the rain. Dante's face hardened in a second. He looked at me, calculated. "Caputo is bringing capos for an unannounced meeting," he said. "I'll clear the smoke. You go to the library." "I'm going to the sitting room," I answered. "Alessia, if I'm a piece in this house, they're going to have to learn the board. If I'm not, it doesn't matter." He looked at me for half a second, took the cloth off his shoulder, threw it on the counter, walked out down the corridor without another word. I followed him after going up to the room quickly, changing the cardigan for a black high-necked blouse, letting my hair down. I didn't touch the makeup. I came back barefoot through the cold corridor. At the entrance of the formal dining room, I stopped. Renzo was already there, standing beside the door, talking quietly with 2 men I recognized only by their backs. Bianchi, a veteran Valenti capo, and Conte, the other, younger. Dante was standing by the fireplace. He saw me arrive at the door. He didn't say anything. He crossed the room in 4 steps, took off his own jacket, and placed it on my shoulders without touching my skin. The weight of the fabric was dense, smelling of his perfume, and a faint trace of smoke from the kitchen. Then, with one of my hands tucked inside the curve of his arm, he turned me to face the men. "Signora Moretti," he announced. "Not Belandi, not anyone's wife. Will be sitting with us." Renzo took half a second longer than usual to give a short nod with his head, and said without disguising it, "Don, with respect, a woman at the table in a meeting of this nature?" Bianchi looked at the floor, but his locked jaw said he agreed with Renzo. Conte tried to smile with professional courtesy, without success. Dante stared at Renzo for a short time before answering. Signora Moretti sits. Whoever doesn't want to listen can leave before the wine. No one left. Dante pulled out the chair to the right of the head of the table for me and waited for me to sit before sitting. I interpreted the jacket on my shoulders as political care, a demonstration that I was no wife of any enemy, but someone under the arm of the Valentis, and that whoever touched me touched him. Strategy. It was strategy. It was. But something cracked a little. Inside, when he introduced me by my father's surname, I kept my face neutral. I poured water for myself, without waiting to be served. Tommaso passed behind my chair and murmured softly, "Just for me. The Don has never wanted wine with anyone before, Signora, so the wine had better be good." I didn't answer, but I made a note. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I spoke little. I listened a lot. Renzo presented the picture for the north, which Corona Nera capos were moving, which were still waiting to see, which Vittorio considered to be in his pocket. Dante asked short, dry questions, without looking at me. Bianchi mentioned Lo Bianco with a caution that said everything. Conte, at the end, asked quietly what we would do about the party in Como, whether it was going to be ignored or used. That was the cue. I spoke. Capo Salviati, I said. Vittorio thinks Salviati loves him. Salviati doesn't love Vittorio. Salviati loves the small anchorage in La Spezia, which Vittorio promised to transfer to the name of a cooperative controlled by Salviati in January, and never transferred. Salviati also can't stand the way Vittorio talks about Sicily in front of the southern capos. Pause. If you go to Salviati with a real promise about La Spezia, he switches sides in one night. The room went silent. And Lo Bianco? Dante asked, without turning his face in my direction. Lo Bianco, I said, saw last week Vittorio push his mistress into a room by the elbow. It wasn't the violence. It was the indifference. Lo Bianco lost his brother last year in circumstances that still pain him. He can't hear indifference about a woman without wanting to kill someone. Don't quote me to him. But if you go to Lo Bianco asking how Belandi treated his own women, he'll give you 2 hours. Renzo looked up at me, for the first time without hardness. Where did the Signora learn to speak like that? In 4 years of dinners, I answered, listening to men who didn't imagine that I was learning. Dante didn't comment. He ended the meeting 10 minutes later. The capos left for the cars in the rain. When the door of the room closed, he turned to me. I was still wearing his jacket on my shoulders. The look in his eye held no player's calculation. It had something I didn't know how to read at the moment, but that seemed to me, in the dark, by the low light of the fireplace like relief. Salviati and Lo Bianco, he said. That's 2 capos out from Vittorio in 1 week. That's 2, I agreed. Why did you give me that now? I thought about the answer. Because I don't want to be used, I said. I want to play. He nodded once, slowly. He said nothing more. He didn't thank me. I preferred it that way. Gratitude at that moment would have ruined everything. I left the room with his jacket still on my shoulder. I only remembered to return it the next morning, after breakfast, folded on top of the library armchair. He found it. He said nothing about that either. Saturday morning. I woke up late. It rained the entire night. The lake, seen from the window of my room, had the color of molten lead. I went down to the kitchen, and Tommaso was standing at the counter with a phone to his ear and his face closed in a way I had never seen. He saw me arrive. He hung up. "The Don is coming," he said. "The Signora is going to want to hear it from the Don, not from me." "Tommaso, Signora, what happened?" He hesitated. Finally he breathed. "Our informant inside the Belandis warned us in the early hours of this morning. There's a man of theirs, Bevilacqua, whom Vittorio has started to suspect. This morning Bevilacqua's wife was found dead in front of the house, in Monza, note pinned in her pocket, the address of this villa written by hand, the Signora's name underneath. It was Vittorio sending a message, to Bevilacqua, and to the Signora at the same time. The kitchen went silent. The cold of the marble climbed up my bare feet. Vittorio knows where I am. Vittorio had a message sent to let you know he knows. Which is different. I looked at Tommaso, and then at the service door, where Dante's footsteps were already approaching. Vittorio knew where I was. Vittorio hadn't sent a warning. He had sent preparation, and the warning was just the part I was supposed to see. Chapter 5. The Bellagio Road. Sunday had dawned gray, but it wasn't the light that woke me. It was the wrong silence of the villa, still heavy with the news from the day before. I already knew the sound of Villa Valenti in the morning. the kitchen door that creaked when Tommaso came in with the bread, Renzo's short step in the stone corridor, the dry cough of one of the gate guards. That Saturday, the bread was missing. Renzo was missing. Anything that resembled a morning that knew what it was going to be was missing. I went down in my robe to the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tiles, and found Tommaso leaning against the counter with the phone still to his ear and nothing in his hands. Neither the bread, nor the coffee, nor the dry irony as always. When he saw me, he lowered the device slowly, like someone deciding halfway through the gesture whether or not to spare me. "Signora," he said. "The Don asked that the Signora not leave her room until he came down." "And since when does the Don decide where I am, Tommaso?" He sketched a half smile without joy. "Since never, and he knows it. That's why he asked me to ask." "Sit." I didn't sit. I crossed the kitchen, picked up the Italian coffee maker, put it on the heat. Tommaso watched me in silence until the water began to rise. "Tell me," I said, without turning. "Bevilacqua's wife. They confirmed just now. The details match what the Don had already said yesterday." The coffee maker whistled. I turned off the heat with a steady hand, and I was angry at the steady hand before I was even afraid of the news. Vittorio had ordered a woman killed to print my name on a piece of paper. I thought of Bevilacqua's wife without ever having seen her, and I thought of myself, and of the two things being, in some horrible way, the same thing. "Where is Dante?" "In the office, with Renzo." "Conte locked down in Milan," Salviati not answering. "Lobianco says he's going to Como today, and the Don thinks Lobianco is telling the truth." Tommaso paused. "The Signora isn't going to leave, is she?" "I'm not going to leave. I'm going with you." He looked at me for a second too long. The Don is not going to like that. It's not his business to like. Dante appeared at the kitchen door dressed to go out. Dark jacket, no tie, and the kind of calm on his face he only used when he was feeling bad inside. Renzo came behind him, with a folder under his arm, and the expression of someone who had argued for half an hour and had lost. "Tommaso," Dante said, "bring the car around to the front." Tommaso walked out without saying anything. Renzo stayed. "I'm going with you," I said. "No." Vittorio wrote my name on a note over the body of an innocent woman. "You're not going to leave me here waiting." "That's exactly what I'm going to do." He walked to the counter, stopped a step away from me, lowered his voice. "Alessia, it's not Lobianco coming to Como today. It's Vittorio's vanity, and wounded vanity shoots first and aims later. Then take the only person in this house who knows exactly how he shoots." Renzo, behind, made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a throat clearing of tiredness. Dante didn't look at him. He looked at me long enough for me to understand that he had lost the argument before he started it. "You stay in the back seat. You don't get out of the car. You don't speak if I don't ask. You don't decide what I do, Dante. You just ask." He breathed through his nose slowly, and that was the greatest agreement he gave to anyone in that house. "Please stay in the back seat." "I stay," I answered. I went up to change the robe for black pants, black blouse, low shoes. I put my father's pen in the inner pocket, as if it weighed enough to balance out the rest of the day. When I came down, Tommaso was already at the wheel. Renzo had stayed in the office with 2 phones, and Dante held the back door of the car open for me without saying a word. I got in. He got in from the other side. The road that leaves Villa Valenti toward Bellagio is a ribbon of asphalt glued to the rock, with the lake on one side and the mountain on the other. On normal mornings, I would have thought about the colors. That morning, I thought about the width. No shoulder, no lateral escape, no way out except forward or backward. I thought as Vittorio would have thought, and I hated myself for thinking like him with such ease. Tommaso drove fast without seeming fast. Dante had his elbow propped on the console, his chin on his closed hand, looking at the curve ahead like someone reading. "Tommaso," he said suddenly. "Who's in front?" "Gray car. 5 curves away. Already there when we left the villa. Behind? Motorcycle. 2 curves. Don't like motorcycles, Tommaso." "I don't, sir." The first burst came before the next curve. I heard the sound before I understood the sound. It was a dry crack, then another, then many together, and the window on my side cracked in a star without breaking. Dante threw me down with the weight of his whole arm. I hit my shoulder on the carpet of the seat. He fell on top of me, and I felt his body shudder once, short, like someone taking a punch he hadn't expected. "Tommaso, get off this road now," Dante said into my ear, too calmly. "Signora," he added, lower, against the leather of the seat. "Stay down." "There's nowhere to get off, sir. Make somewhere appear." The car jolted to the right. scraped against something, came back. The shot stopped for 2 seconds, reloaded, came back. Dante stayed on top of me, and I felt his chest rise and fall fast, and I also felt something hot wetting my blouse on the right shoulder, and I knew, without needing to look, that it wasn't mine. "You took a bullet," I said against the leather of the seat. "I know. Where?" "Shoulder." "Get off me, I'll look." "No, Dante. No." Tommaso braked hard. I heard tires. I heard metal scraping a wall. I heard his door opening. I heard more distant shots. And then silence. The kind of silence that isn't silence. It's just the ear refusing to accept any more sound for a moment. "Stone house 80 meters away," Tommaso said, coming back inside. "We go on foot. The motorcycle will come around through the trail." Dante sat up with effort, and I saw the stain on his jacket for the first time. It wasn't big. It was exact. It was just below the collarbone, on the right side, and he held his arm on that side against his body as if he were cold. "On your feet," I said. "I'm on my feet." "You're not on your feet. You think you're on your feet." He laughed soundlessly, and it was worse than if he had moaned. We got out of the car together. Tommaso went ahead with his pistol out of the holster. I was in the middle holding Dante's good arm. He was behind telling Tommaso every 5 steps to walk faster. We climbed a stretch of loose stones, crossed a low fence, went around an old fig tree, and the house appeared. Small, closed, peeling shutters, the kind of place where a fisherman keeps nets in winter. Tommaso forced the door open from the side with his shoulder. We went in. He locked it. He stayed at the window. 2 minutes, sir," he said. "Maybe 3. "Enough," Dante answered. I sat him in a wooden chair in the middle of the empty kitchen. I took off his jacket carefully, then the white shirt, and the shirt was soaked on one entire side, and I thought, without wanting to think, about how much blood fits in a body before the body gives up. "Tommaso, kit," I said. "Under the sink, signora. Every safe house has one." There was a kit. Surgical thread, curved needle, gauze, alcohol, ampule of local anesthetic, a small sealed syringe. I knew about it because, in Florence, before Villa Belandi, I had done 2 years of first aid with the Student Red Cross. My mother had insisted, saying that a restorer's hand also needs to know how to close what tears. The bullet had gone in and out. It was the only mercy of that day. I washed my hands in the bucket of water Tommaso brought, sterilized the needle in the flame of his lighter, broke the ampule, drew the anesthetic with the syringe, and infiltrated slowly along the edges of the wound, remembering step by step what I had learned in training. Dante took a deep breath once. He didn't make another sound. "Look at me," I said. He looked. "If you pass out, I'll stitch you with you passed out and curse you until morning." "I'm not going to pass out. You're too pale for that line." "Even so," I began. "The first stitch is always the worst because it's the one that proves the skin gives way. After that, it becomes rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pull, close. 1, 2, 3, pull, close." My hands didn't tremble, and that scared me more than if they had trembled. It wasn't fear. It was anger. Anger has a steady hand. Tommaso went out to check the road. He came back. He went out again. He came back, and this time with the afternoon already falling, said something about the gray car having gone away. I barely heard. The house smelled of stone dust, of old sea air, of an old bread forgotten somewhere. The small window let in a light that had the color of lead, and that descended in tone every hour. I closed stitch by stitch, and Dante looked at me as if I were the ceiling of the house he had just chosen so as not to die. When I finished the last suture, his eyes were already closed. He wasn't sleeping. I knew he wasn't. He was just closing his eyes, so as not to force anyone else to look at him like that. Night fell behind the window without warning, as it falls in northern Italy in October. Tommaso came in for the last time, saw, and went out without commenting. He went to the other room to set up 2 cots that he had found in a closet. I sat in a chair next to Dante. I cleaned blood from my arm with a damp cloth. I looked at the sleeping man. I remembered myself getting into his car 2 weeks earlier on the staircase of Como, saying that if I was going to be used again, I'd rather know by whom. I thought that I had gotten into that car thinking I was going to be a piece, and that I had just stitched up the hand that would move me, and I could no longer decide in that fisherman's kitchen whether I was the piece, the player, or the only thing between Vittorio and the man in the chair. That was when he spoke. "Alessia," softly, almost without voice, eyes still closed. "Alessia," again, lower. "Alessia." The third time was a sigh. I froze with the damp gauze in my hand. It wasn't a request. It wasn't fever delirium. It was a name spoken like someone praying in a small house, like someone checking whether the only important thing in the world was still in the room. I leaned forward. I brought my face close to his. I smelled blood, and a man's soap, and some expensive cologne that had survived the morning. His mouth was slightly open, dry lips, brow furrowed like a child dreaming of the dark. I got close enough to feel his breath hit my cheek. I got too close. My free hand went up to his face without me ordering it to. I touched his temple. I went down his jaw. I stopped a millimeter from his mouth. I thought that if I kissed that man now, in that chair, with the stitches still fresh on his shoulder, I would never again be able to lie to myself about what he was. I pulled back. I rested my forehead for a second against his temple, instead of the kiss, and I moved away slowly, and he didn't open his eyes when I moved away. He didn't open them on purpose. I knew he hadn't opened them on purpose. He had whispered my name 3 times, and had pretended to sleep, so as not to force me into a decision I couldn't yet make. And that, perhaps, was the first generous thing a man had done for me in 4 years. I stood up. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to the room where Tommaso had laid out the cots. I lay down dressed. I stared at the ceiling until the ceiling disappeared. I didn't sleep. The 2 days between the fisherman's kitchen and the dinner in Milan passed in slow motion. Dante barely appeared. He was resting his shoulder, pretending to rest. I replayed in my head, dozens of times, the low sound of my name spoken 3 times in that chair, and every time I replayed it, I understood better that I had pulled back, and that I had not pulled back, and that the decision not to kiss had been a form of postponed kiss. It was with that head that I opened the closet, 2 days later, and chose the red. It wasn't revenge against Camille. Camille no longer deserved space inside that head. It was a declaration that was older, of the 20-year-old girl who had been stuffed into a black dress for the first time and had understood, at that instant, that black in that house was not mourning. It was a uniform. I no longer wore the uniform. The dress had long sleeves, a high neck, a defined waist, and no neckline. The skin it showed was the skin I decided to show. Wrists, jaw, hand without a ring. No ring at all on any hand, on any finger. That was the sentence. It was complete. Dante was waiting for me in the hall of the Valenti house in Milan. He wore a discreet bandage under his jacket and still moved his right arm with the economy of a man who had learned, 2 days before, that he had a shoulder. He watched me come down the stairs. He didn't say anything when I reached the last step. He just held out his good arm, and I left my hand in the crook of his elbow, and we went in. The capos were already at the table, Renzo at the opposite head, Bianchi, Conte, 2 men I didn't know, and, 3 chairs to the right, Capo Lo Bianco, who had come in the car of a Belandi less than a week earlier, and who was now there, seated, waiting. When they saw me come in, there was that short silence that only happens in rooms of men who have learned to fall silent without showing they have fallen silent. Dante pulled out the chair to the right of his head of the table for me. Lo Bianco stood up half a second before the others, and that didn't go unnoticed by anyone at the table, and he knew it had not gone unnoticed. I sat. Dante sat. The dinner began. Vittorio wasn't there, of course, but he was in every look that tried to measure my left hand without being caught, in every too gentle question about Florence, about Villa Valenti, about the weather on the lake, in every compliment Bianchi made on the red of the dress while not looking at the red of the dress. Vittorio was the name that wasn't pronounced. On the second course, Lo Bianco leaned forward. "Signora Moretti," he said, "I would like, with the Don's permission, to offer the Signora a piece of information that no longer fits with me." Dante didn't take his eyes off the plate. He just tilted his head a millimeter. "The Signora offered me courtesy in Como, on the night when many people did not." Lo Bianco continued, "I pay my debts. The Mr. Capo Belandi ordered the death of Bevilacqua's wife. I won't give names at this table today. It wouldn't be serious, and I have been a Valenti Capo for too short a time for that. But, in private, to the Don, on some day this week, I will." Renzo wrote down the sentence. Another capo, from the middle of the table, stood up, went to the window, stayed with his back turned for a short time, came back and sat in silence. I saw Dante see this. I saw Dante store this. The dinner continued as if the wall hadn't fallen, but the wall had fallen. At the end, Bianchi and the capo from the window came to me, separately, to kiss my hand. Not Dante's, mine. It was the gesture that cost Vittorio 2 more men inside the hall, and neither of them said a word about Vittorio, and I understood that I was learning, in real time, the new language one speaks when omertà begins to turn in favor of the other side. We left around midnight. Tommaso was waiting in the car with the engine low. Dante held the door for me. Before I got in, he leaned in, not toward my ear, toward my shoulder, and paused there, and said against the fabric of the dress, too low for any other person in the world, "You didn't have to be so beautiful tonight." I didn't answer. I got in. I closed the door. I looked ahead, and only in the rearview mirror, when he got in on the other side, and Tommaso put the car in gear, did I let my mouth relax into a smile that no one at that dinner had seen. The drive back to Como was silent. The lake was black. The mountains had vanished into the dark. When we passed the midpoint of the trip, Tommaso looked in the rearview mirror and said, in a weather forecast tone, "Dawn, the sky has closed. We're going to hit a storm before the villa." Dante looked outside for the first time on the drive. "Good," he answered, without explaining what was good. And I understood, in my corner of the seat, without him knowing I had understood, that it was good for him that it was raining, and that it was good for me that it was raining, and that between the storm and the villa, there was no longer any room to pretend, on both sides, that that car was not going in the direction it had been going since the night of the ring in Como. Chapter 6. I know the storm arrived before we did. When the car stopped at the entrance of Villa Valenti, the rain was already falling in whole sheets, and the wind pushed the water diagonally against the stone facade. Tommaso got out first with a large umbrella, opened it for me, and I held it by the handle without needing anyone's arm. Dante waited for the door on the other side, refused the second umbrella with a gesture, crossed the 5 meters to the drenched portico, and didn't seem to mind. Inside the house, the low light of the hall made the fabric of the red dress look darker. I took off my shoes, held them by the straps in one hand, let my hair fall any which way. "Signora," Tommaso said from the door, "I'm going to the annex. Does the signora need anything before that?" "No, Tommaso." "The dawn?" "No." Tommaso nodded once, made that discreet half-bow of his, and disappeared down the service corridor. The door closed. The house became ours. I didn't go up to the room. I crossed the sitting room, opened the French doors of the side veranda, and stepped out into the rain. I needed the noise. I needed the noise of the water on the stones of the veranda, and the noise of the lake beating below, and a noise that wasn't my own head. The last 2 days had been too loud inside. I walked to the stone parapet. The water ran down my nape, ran down the inside of the high collar of the dress, down my back. I wasn't shivering. 4 years of Vittorio had taught me not to shiver for anything, and that I would unlearn at some point, but not on that night. I heard the French door open behind me. I didn't turn. Dante crossed the veranda slowly, in no hurry at all, and stopped a meter to my left. He carried his own dark coat hanging from his arm, not worn, on his arm, and stood there with it for a second before offering it. "You're going to catch pneumonia, Alessia." It was the first time he called me by name with his eyes open, standing, in the light, without the disguise of the fisherman's chair. I made an inner note before answering. "I won't. At least accept the coat. I don't want the coat." I turned to him. "I want you to answer me one thing." He lowered his arm. He waited. The rain was hitting the side of his face, and he wasn't quite blinking. The bandage on his shoulder barely showed under the wet shirt. He had that look of a man who didn't yet know he was being looked at as if he were being decided. "Why me, Dante?" The question came out without trembling. I had already rehearsed it in the seams of the fisherman's house, in the back seat of the car to Milan, on the staircase I hadn't gone up. He stared at the lake for 2 seconds. Then he stared at me. "Because I came to fetch you thinking I had found a piece," he said slowly, "and I found the only person who doesn't let herself be moved." The rain washed away some of the sound of the sentence. It didn't wash away the rest. I swallowed. I dropped the shoes on the stone floor. They fell with a muffled sound. "Are you lying?" I asked. "Not in that sentence, but in some. In some, yes. And one day, I will owe you the whole list." It was this sentence that decided. Not the first, the second. Because the first was the sentence that a Don knows how to choose at the right moment. The second was the first thing that hadn't been chosen. He took half a step. He waited. I didn't pull back. He took the whole step. He waited again. I didn't pull back. He slowly raised his hand and stopped 2 fingers from my face, with his palm turned toward me, like someone showing he had no weapon. It was the gesture of a man who had learned, in a fisherman's kitchen chair, that it isn't enough to whisper a name 3 times. You have to wait for the woman to decide if she wants to be called. I pressed my cheek against the palm of his hand. His hand was cold from the rain and warm inside. The kiss took a long time to start. When it started, it was slow. It wasn't mafia. It wasn't dawn. It wasn't the rush of a man who had gotten what he wanted. It was mouth on mouth, like someone answering a question that had taken years to be asked. The rain kept falling. I placed my other hand on his chest, below the collarbone, on the good side, and I felt his heart beat too fast for a man who seemed so still. When I pulled back enough to look, I let my hand rise to his face. "If you use me, I'll destroy you," I said, low. "I know how." He held my wrist with his hand, not to take the hand off his face, to keep it there. "I know," he answered. We went in together. The French door slammed shut by itself behind the wind. The veranda light went out. I woke up before he did. The light on Lake Como on the morning after the storm is a different light. Low, golden, washed clean, as if someone had opened the whole house during the night and let the air change. I lay still under the sheet for a short time, counted his regular breathing beside me, counted to 10, counted to 20, and I couldn't tell myself it had been a mistake. I got up. I picked up his white shirt from the back of the armchair, the same shirt he had been wearing before the rain, now dry, hung with that mechanical care that he had with the house, and I put it on over nothing. The buttons were large. I closed only 2. I went downstairs barefoot. The corridor was silent. Down below, a coffee maker was whistling. I stopped at the kitchen door before he noticed me. Dante was standing with his back to me, barefoot, white t-shirt, the bandage showing under the sleeve. He had set the table for 2 without asking. Bread, cheese, honey, a cut fruit that he had probably cut badly. He was fussing with the cups with the disproportionate concentration of someone doing a small thing for fear of doing a big thing wrong. Why did he show up so quickly at that party in Como? The thought crossed without ceremony. I let it spin around once and pushed it away, not with a lie, with a choice. I knew it was a question. I knew it would still have to be asked, but I also knew that I had chosen to come down those stairs barefoot and put on his shirt, and that a real choice opens a line of credit in the morning. He turned. He saw me. He smiled a small, slightly crooked smile that I had never seen on that face. "You woke up early," he said. "You made coffee," I said. I crossed the kitchen barefoot. He pulled out the chair for me. I sat. He set the full cup near my elbow, stood beside me for half a second longer than necessary, and went back to cut the bread. Before sitting down, he stopped, looked at his shirt on me, and said more to the air than to me, "Stay." "The shirt?" I asked. "Everything." I smiled over the rim of the cup. He understood. He sat. Outside, the lake was smooth again, as if it had never rained the night before. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought Dante Valenti had been my salvation. After 4 years of being humiliated, he was the first man who touched me as if I were more than a broken piece. 3 months in his bed, 3 months wearing his shirt, 3 months believing that his hand on my waist was protection. I trusted. Until the afternoon I walked into his office to leave a surprise and found what I should never have seen. There were receipts, photographs, and a detail connected to the woman who destroyed my marriage. It was a 2-year plan with my name at the center, arrows pointing to Camille, to the jeweler, to the party in Como, and a sentence written by hand that still burns behind my eyes. "If pushed onto the right stage, she will destroy herself." What did they mean by that? My stomach turned before I even finished reading, because everything pointed to one single truth. Dante had not healed my wound. He had only chosen where to open the next one. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia Romance and Billionaire Romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers.